everybody. L'chaim v'levracha. L'chaim harav. L'chaim. L'chaim v'levracha. L'chaim v'levracha. L'chaim. Shalom aleichem. L'chaim v'levracha. L'chaim v'levracha. I'll tell a story about Philadelphia. The city of brotherly love. Now you're supposed to laugh officially. Yes. So this story happened with the Previous Rebbe. I say it's a story that people tell. If I can have your attention, please. What is your name? Mendy Greenberg. Shalom Aleichem, Mendy Greenberg. Thank you for having me. Thank you. A gesunde Pesach. A freiliche Pesach. A tzlachadike Pesach. Was lachst du? Yeah. When you're young, you don't think you need brachas. When you're old, you know that there's not enough brachas. So a story that they tell about the Previous Rebbe. The Previous Rebbe was in America in 1929, 1930. He came at the end of August of 1929, and he stayed till June, Mustame, or the beginning of July 1930. Almost a year, 10 months. During that trip, the Rebbe, the Previous Rebbe, was physically well. When he came 10 years later, they wheeled him off the ship in a wheelchair. The Hasidim who had seen him 10 years earlier did not recognize him. In those 10 years, he aged a lifetime. But when he came the first time in 1929, 1930, he was healthy. Bechitzonius, he was quite beaten up, but he looked healthy. And he traveled to all the great centers of Jewish life then. That's 90 years ago. As far as St. Louis. St. Louis is the gateway to the west. It's on the Mississippi. And the Rebbe was in every big city that there were Jews till the Mississippi, Mamish. He was in many, many places. And one of the places he visited was Philadelphia. He visited Philadelphia. And of course, the story was that when he was here, he went to visit the Liberty Bell. You know, the Previous Rebbe went to visit Liberty Bell. And there was a chair. As a child, I visited Liberty Bell in 1976, the bicentennial. We went from Gan Yisrael, we went to see Rabbi Shem Tov at the Shach of Philadelphia, yeah? So we came to Philadelphia, we saw the crack in the Liberty Bell. But apparently, next to the Liberty Bell, there's a chair that belonged to the President, Washington. And they allowed the Previous Rebbe to sit down on that chair. Have you ever heard the story? They allowed the Previous Rebbe to sit down on the chair which belonged to George Washington. I don't know what he commented, but this is, I believe, true. While he was in Philadelphia, they announced that the Lubavitcher Rebbe is here. Now remember, in the 1930s, 1920s, 1930s, there were millions of Jews in America. Millions of Yidden. And they were, as they say in the culture, very Jewish. They spoke Yiddish, they spoke with their hands, they ate lax and bagels, they had a lot of politics. They competed for the nicest house and the nicest car and so on. But they weren't particularly religious. They were cultural Jews more than they were religious Jews. And you know what? Culture goes a long way towards religion. You know, halavai, we should have cultural Jews today. Today we have Jews whose culture is defined by who knows who. But there were many, many Yidden in America. They used to call America Eretz Eicheles Yeshveh, a land which consumes its inhabitants. You come to the United States of America, and as they used to say it 90 years ago, you melt. You stop being who you are, and you become a part of the American the melting pot. I'm a New Yorker. We had a mayor many years ago whose name was Dinkins. And he campaigned, and he spoke of the Great Mosaic. The Great Mosaic is an early version of what they call today multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is a good thing for Orthodoxy. It may not be a good thing for America, but it's a good thing for Orthodoxy. You could wear a whole beard and you're not crazy than the next guy. The other guy's got tattoos and piercings and you got a beard. So, what's wrong? But in the 1930s, there was a conformity. There was a need to become like everybody else. Being an American means you had to be like the other person. If you were a little bit different, then it was not so pleasant, or very not pleasant. So the story that I wish to share with you is that Rebbe came to Philadelphia. They did tell me, it's apparently a true story. And they announced in the Yiddish papers, in those days there were a few Yiddish papers. Yiddish, I mean the Yiddish language. Not only Jewish, Yiddish language papers that the Rebbe is here. And that if you want to meet the Rebbe, he's in this and this address, and he's staying for so many and so many days. So many people came to see the Rebbe. Hundreds of people came to see the Rebbe. Each one with his own issue. This one had a problem with health. This one had a problem with parnasa. This one was worried about his children. This one was worried about a shidduch. Everybody had their issues. There were a few Jewish kids, adolescents, teenagers, who saw this ad in the paper. Now you must understand, when the Rebbe came to America in 1929, 1930, he was the held. You speak Yiddish, the held. He was the hero of the Jewish people. The Frierdiker Rebbe came from Russia with an enormous amount of Jewish capital. You know, in politics you have capital. Capital can be measured in dollars, and capital could be measured in your notoriety, in your fame, in your accomplishments, right? And you have to use your capital carefully. The Frierdiker came from Russia with an enormous amount of Jewish capital, and he expended it in a very short time. He managed to burn all the bridges. All the people who loved him said, I like this Rebbe, but he's too controversial, so I can't afford to like him anymore. But when he came to this country, he had a lot of capital, meaning the Jewish world revered him. American Jews were by no means Orthodox, but he stared into the fangs of the lion and he came out alive. He was challenged by Stalin personally. Joseph Stalin knew of the previous Rebbe personally, and he hated him, and he came out alive. And the whole Jewish world, not just the Orthodox world, had this incredible sense of reverence for the Frierdiker Rebbe. He was a Jew who lived in this powerful, evil empire, the Soviet Union, and he defied the Soviets and he lived to tell the tale. It was a great accomplishment. So wherever he traveled, huge crowds of people came to see him. Not necessarily were they Hasidim, not necessarily were they even Orthodox, but the Rebbe was a hero to Jews. He was a person that you wanted to look at as someone who had done something extraordinary. Parenthetically, whenever the Rebbe came to a new city, the people would come out and greet him in the train station with great fanfare and pomp and circumstance. So each time the Rebbe came to a new city where the people gave him a lot of kavod, he would fast. So every time he came to a new city, that day he didn't eat and drink. His secretary watched him thin away. I mean, he traveled a lot. Every time he came to a new city, they gave him kavod. Yenem tagat anishu gessen, he would fast. He wrote to his wife, to his Rebbe, and said, "You got to tell your husband to eat." And he, so on one of these trips, the Rebbe, the Previous Rebbe's secretary, who was later killed by the Nazis, said to the Rebbe, "What's this business with fasting? What's this business with fasting?" Every time he says, "The kavod, when people give you honor, it's a terrible thing. This honor. I gotta purge it out of myself, and I purge it out of myself through fasting." So the Rebbe said to the Rebbe, "What does fasting have to do with kavod?" So the Rebbe said in Yiddish, "Men darf das heraus kränken." You can't possibly translate that into English. "Men darf das heraus kränken," which means approximately, roughly, you have to sick it out of yourself. Not like sicking and telling a dog to sick a person, but you have to make yourself sick in expunging it from your personality. Whenever he came to a new city and people came to see him in trains, sometimes he would come to a city like in Massachusetts. He stopped in Springfield. He didn't get out of the train. He stood at the platform and the people came and they gave him kavod. That day he didn't eat.
They call it detox.
Detox. The Rebbe was not eating. Anyway, he came to Philadelphia and they gave him a lot of kavod and they put in the local papers that the Lubavitcher Rebbe is here for so many days. If you want to come see him, this is where he's staying, you can come and meet him. So there's a couple of American kids, 4 or 5 boys, who decided to have fun at the Rebbe's expense. An old rabbi from Europe, or a rabbi with a beard who speaks Yiddish. They're Americans, they're going to have fun at his expense. So they prepared questions, supposedly to ask them sincerely, but their intention was to mock him, to make fun of the Rebbe. They prepared some questions, religious questions, theological questions, questions of faith. And they came to the house where the Rebbe was staying. And there were many people in line, maybe hundreds of people waiting in line. And they got in line. And they're waiting their turn. And there's a bunch of people waiting to go into the Rebbe. They stood in line for a very short time, a few minutes. And some old rabbi with a beard comes over to them and says, the Rebbe wants to see you. And they skipped the entire line. He brought them into the house that the Rebbe was staying, brought them up to the second floor and said to wait. Literally in a few minutes, they were ushered into the Rebbe's room. The Frierdiker Rebbe's room. They walked into the previous Rebbe's room, and as soon as they walked across the threshold, the Rebbe said to them, I understand that you have questions to ask me. But they were taken aback by this whole situation. How did the Rebbe know that they were in line? And how did the Rebbe know that they had questions? And they had prepared the questions cynically. But when the Rebbe favored them and schlepped them to the front of the line and began the conversation, do I know you? Oh, I'm looking at you and I'm looking at you. Soon I'm going to get your name. Don't tell me. Shalom Aleichem. You had a big beard then also, but now it's even bigger. Okay, wait. Don't tell me. So they go into the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, and the previous Rebbe says to them, I understand that you have questions. And they were very, very taken aback by the Rebbe's awareness. The Rebbe knew with Ruach HaKodesh, with his divine sensitivity, that they had questions. And they presented the questions that they prepared. But they were not that cynical, you understand. They were not that cynical the way they presented it. And the Rebbe answered their questions. The Rebbe answered each question that they asked. He answered them earnestly. He answered them grown up, mature, with respect. And after the Rebbe answered their questions, the Rebbe said, I'm asking you a personal favor, that you should keep Shabbos. In America, in 1930, Shabbos was the Achilles heel, you understand? And each of them kept Shabbos. They kept. A guy once asked me, how come the Lubavitcher Rebbe didn't make a mitzvah Shabbos? So I told him, because the Lubavitcher Rebbe didn't make a mitzvah frum. If you keep Shabbos, you're an Orthodox Jew. It's very simple. If you don't keep Shabbos, you're not frum. If you do keep Shabbos, you are frum. What about tefillin and kosher and taras hamishpacha? They'll fall like dominoes. If a person keeps Shabbos, if you do one mitzvah and it's Shabbos, your life's over. You're finished. You're done. You're going to do them all. Shabbos is the anchor of Yiddishkeit. It's a fact of life. It's an undeniable fact. In America, Jews have kept many mitzvahs. My grandfather was an American-born Jew. He remembers many shuls that had a 6 o'clock minyan, a 7 Shabbos morning, Rosh Hashanah morning, Yom Kippur morning. People came to shul, they davened shachars, they got aliyahs, they made pledges. They have a musaf, they had a kiddush, and they got on train and went to work. You understand? And from those Yidden is gonish geblieben, gonish. There's nothing left, not from their children, not from their grandchildren, not from their great-grandchildren, unless the Rebbe got a hold of them and ruined their lives. Shabbos was the issue in America. Shabbos, because if you didn't work Shabbos, my grandfather told me that his father, my great-grandfather, worked 5 days a week. Case this, and it came Friday afternoon. He told his employer, who was invariably a Jew, "Morgen komm ich nicht. Morgen komm ich nicht. Tomorrow I'm not coming to work." He's at the Kimm's nicht morgen, so ich komme Montag euchet. If you're not going to come tomorrow, don't come on Monday. And he would come home to his wife, my great-grandmother, my mother's grandmother, and he would say, Sime. Her name was Sime. Sima. Sime met mich abgesagt von der Arbeit. I was fired. This happened every Friday. And there were many women who told their husbands, if you don't go to work tomorrow, I'm not letting you into the house. You understand? And Sime would say to her husband, Sorg mich nicht. Don't worry. Der Rebbeinu Shalom hat geholfen bis jetzt, and the Rebbeinu Shalom hat helfen weiter. The Rebbeinu Shalom, God Almighty, has supported us until now, and will continue supporting us going forward. And that's why my great-grandfather was from, because of his mother's Mesiras Nefesh, and that's why I'm a Jew. I wouldn't be Jewish without it. It's not so complicated. So the Rebbe asked these boys they should keep Shabbos. And then they asked the Frierdiker Rebbe the following question. There's so many people waiting outside in line. We're young schneckelach, we're young pishers. And we came here to bother you. We came here to be contrary, to be difficult. How come you pushed us to the front of the line? How come you pushed us ahead of everybody else? So the previous Rebbe said, all these people are here because they have interests. They want things from me. This one wants health. This one wants parnasa. This one wants children. This one wants nachas. This one wants a shidduch for their children. It's their business. You came here with questions about Yiddishkeit. That's my business. That's my geschäft. That's my geschäft. So I figured I have a right to put you at the front of the line. Your interest is my interest. You understand? The Rebbe wants one thing, but I'm mer Yiddish. I'm mer Hasidish. We should be Jewish, and we should be Jewish in the oifen of the Chatchila. We should be Jewish where it really matters. It's not just something that we do. This is our definition. We're Jews. We're servants of Hashem. We're Hasidim. This is the whole Rebbe. The Rebbe wants, like the Rebbe said to that woman, if it will make an increase in Torah mitzvahs, I'll pose for a picture with you. And the Rebbe posed for a picture with this woman because she said that she'll be more religious. It's not complicated. It's not complicated, but it's a priority. You understand? It's a priority. Okay, l'chaim v'levracha, l'chaim tev l'shalom, l'chaim v'levracha, l'chaim v'levracha, l'chaim everybody, l'chaim. Lama zagin tzama locha nafshi. Tzama locha nafshi is the perfect Lubavitcher niggin. You know why? It was composed by the Alter Rebbe. Did you know that? It was composed by the Alter Rebbe. Nobody knew until the Rebbe revealed it in 1954. So it's a niggin from the Alter Rebbe, it's a niggin from our Rebbe. So what could be better than that? Tzama locha nafshi. Rabbi Brennan just told me, Rabbi Brennan, sitting right next to me, says to me that the story that I just told, when he would tell the story in his shul, there was an old lady who would say, not that old, just 56, a lady. She would say, that's this guy who comes to shul every Shabbos. In other words, that
Sarah Cohen knows who it is.
in other words, one of the Chevre that the Frierdiker Rebbe called out of the line, they should ask their questions. He knows who he is. In other words, it's not just a nice story; it's a true story. Some of the stories are actually true. I always make them up.
You could ask her when she's in shul.